Hi everyone, welcome to AGSIS Academy of the series Thomas Hobbes uh, of the video today's part third under Political Science Optional PSIR Western Political Thought. Just let's have quick reminder of the immediate previous part 2 as to what actually we discussed, those who are joining for this video now, so that they can have some ideas about just immediately the previous one. We had discussed about like Leviathan, about that how important was that from Thomas Hobbes' point of view. Then we discussed about civil war, how actually the entire scenario was significant from Thomas Hobbes' point of view, and why Thomas Hobbes described all those things and necessitate to go for absolute sovereignty. Dear friends, the next thing he highlighted was about the concept of treatise on politics and how human nature was so significant he discussed about at that point of time. And then quickly good good and bad will that time was prevailing, and then how uh, how so many things were happening right across the society, which like Thomas Hobbes was really very much disturbed. And dear friends, like further this the civil war, which was disturbing everything, and from and he what he talked about like summum malum or greatest evil that and that was the fear of violent death. Then political committee, yeah, he what he talked about need to be reoriented, and again that was having problems, what again he highlighted, dear friends. And then he talked about the state of nature, as Hobbes calls this anarchic condition and must be a war of all against all. He tried to discuss in the state of nature. Then, dear friends, he also talked about like just to avoid the state of nature where the violent death or the problems or the pole star of political reasoning he talked about. And then he also discussed there's no particular sovereign power which could really take care of the entire scenario which was prevailing at that point of time, and he was concerned with everybody as any right person can be. And further, dear friends, as just quick reminder, he talked about like explicitly the state of nature, nothing can be considered just or unjust, and every man must be considered by carrying all rights, and those were essential for everyone to survive. And then he talked about second law of nature, and then he came to the point of commonwealth, and that was very significant part of Thomas Hobbes what he discussed, and the purpose of a commonwealth he discussed in his part 2, dear friends. And under commonwealth, as we had discussed, he had also talked about like authorization and giving of right of governing of a person to the second party, and then assembly of man on certain conditions, and then giving everything and authorizing all actions lack manner to a particular authority. Later, as you saw, that was called sovereign power. Then he gave then he gave certain principles. He talked about like sovereign principles of rights, and he discussed under that like sovereignty cannot possibly breach the covenant. And he further talked about like and as he further talked about like which eventually led to the formation of social contract. And as we discussed in that, the sovereign exists because the majority did give the consent for ruling them, and the minority too had agreed to abide by this agreement, and everyone had given consent in that sense, and everybody was an author of the act of the sovereign. So he talked later. And then purpose of the commonwealth, as we will see later, it was like about the peace, development, progress, so that anarchy and chaos should be avoided, and also security and prevention of discord should be avoided. Essentially at that point in time was important, dear friends. He talked about this further, like to prescribe the rules of civil war, and the property should not be disturbed, and the civil wars should be stopped, and the civil law should be, you can say, inculcated, and there should be judges who can really try to solve the disputes. At that point of time, there were too many problems. Then Hobbes explicitly also rejected the idea of separation of powers. Uh, and in addition to this, Hobbes explicitly did not favor about censorship of the press and avoided the restrictions on, and he talked about the restrictions on the rights of the free speech. He did not give much freedom to the media persons, as he understood it will come on the way of national interest. So he was not in favor of giving unlimited freedom to the media persons. And later we discussed about, like, he talked about the classification of the government in terms of democracy, aristocracy, monarchy, etc., etc. And because sovereignty is more important, either it should be led by one, or more than by one, or in the form of, you can say, any political group of persons, or you can say, uh, led by assembly of a part called an aristocracy, and then, or monarchy, uh, or like you can say by popular commonwealth, or like democracy. Dear friends, and he talked about, above all the governments, that monarchy is reasonably the best government from that perspective, and he emphasized on that, that should be there. Then further, uh, just quickly reminding, he talked about succession, who will be the successor or heir of the government once the government will not be in a position to really uh, take the helm of affairs. What will happen in that condition? So it talked about that. And then, regarding the question, who will appoint the successor of a monarch, if in the case of monarchy or the government really dies, then what will happen, or like gets somehow dethroned, then the sovereign authority who should take care and should really uh, consider of the position of the government. He talked very uh, nicely in a very detailed way, and there should be some manifestations of the monarchy should be already appointed, or should be in a standby mode, so that successor should always be left to the judgment, and the will of the present possessor should be reflecting over there, dear friends. And he was always pretty clear that there should be no confusion about as to how the succession should be there, and then right persons should be taken into considerations. He talked about religion as well, and he told, like, in case when the issue will come of religion, the government can take into account about the facts which can set the things straight. And he also talked about, for the development, for peace and progress, there is also requirement of taxation should be given or imposed to the extent possible that should be practically uh, feasible. And Thomas Hobbes also believed that equal justice includes the equal imposition of taxes as and when requires for the benefit of the mass, and he championed public support for those unable to maintain themselves, because that's also very essential, so that development, peace, and progress can really reflect in a way that's very essential. And further, Hobbes, in part fourth of his book, Kingdom of Darkness, deliberately talked a lot about, because there was a sense of darkness everywhere, and then people were not in a position to defend themselves, and then lawlessness, anarchy, chaos everywhere was prevailing. So he gave tremendous emphasis on Kingdom of Darkness. There was nothing but a confederacy of deceivers, and dominion over man in that particular time. And then everybody was trying to grab others' rights and try to create problems for others. That was essentially, dear friends. So, having got some grips of the previous ideas, coming back to the present position of part third, now we are starting regarding sovereign authority. and that's so essential a topic which could creep over in IS mains exams or even PCS mains exams of Pol Science as an optional PSIR at state levels. So, dear friends, in this correction, let's see what exactly it refers to. It refers to basically to obey common authority, and that's essential, which Thomas Hobbes calls and talks about the sovereignty by institutions, dear friends. And he says like if threatened by a conqueror, then the covenant for protection by promising obedience is very important. At any cost, the sovereignty and sovereign of authority should be established. What he refers to in this connection is there should be legitimate ways of establishing sovereignty in one or other form. But the point is, there has always been a sense of fear among subject whosoever has ruled, whosoever has captured, and whosoever territory has taken into consideration. It is the public which always face the wrath of the conqueror for right or wrong reasons. And precisely on that account, dear friends, it's so significant. Here, Thomas Hobbes tries to paint a sense of picture that there should be a sense of sovereign authority, whosoever is there, even the conqueror outsider is there, still the subject need to have sovereign authority, so that there should be a sense of smooth functioning and rule of law should be prevailing, not chaos and anarchy should be having their own ways. Probably to avoid those anarchic situations, as Thomas Hobbes had already seen in Civil War, English Civil War, so he wanted to avoid this at any cost. And under social covenant, that definitely involves both the renunciation or transfer of right and authorization of the sovereign power. You can call it like political legitimacy, and might be depending on not on how a government comes to power, how does he rule, what does he rule. That's one thing, but the important factor in this connection is effectively protecting the public. That's very very significant, and that has to be there, dear friends. So what Thomas Hobbes says, because there are many examples in the world, not only at like Thomas Hobbes' time, even you can see at any point in time of the history, since time immemorial, it has been seen. Those conquerors which come to acquire the new territory, they have become, or they generally tend to become oblivious of the fact that they too are human beings where they have been conquered. They need to be treated at par with humanity, and those who treat with humanity, they are the real rulers. So they remind, rather Thomas Hobbes reminds the rulers or other at the helm of powers, that there is a need to have political obligation from both the sides, so that the subjects or the conquered or the ruled should be protected from all under rule of laws of that state of the governance, and that is so essential. Having said this, having talked about like establishing sovereign authority, now Thomas Hobbes talks about absolutism regarding the governance. Dear friends, sometimes it may also happen that you may be asked directly, what do you mean by absolutism? Explain with the help of suitable examples of that contemporary era. And they can also sometimes refer it, how do you think the application of absolutism in the global contemporary discourse in a, you can say, uh, Middle East, or you can say in a globalized world. The terminology could be different, but that might be asked. Now, the point is, let us see what Thomas Hobbes talks in this sense and how he has discussed about this. When when he talks about absolutism, a form of government and governance, he talks about like on pragmatic grounds. He talks about the rulers should be firm enough, ardent enough, and then severe enough to rule over the ruled. or to rule in a country or in a state that is so essential from any point of view that can take care of the public. Preferably, he hints to give about monarchical absolutism. He talks about monarchy that should form the government. From his point of view, monarchy is the best form of government, though other governments are also there who can be functioning well. But from Thomas Hobbes' point of view, the indication is about his this particular type of government and must have absolute authority. Its powers must not be divided or limited. Here, in this sense, dear friends, Thomas Hobbes talks about there should be given maximum power or optimization of power should be accorded to the current government, come what may, in the form of absolute power. Why does he talk about like this? There is a question, there is a catch here. If you see the history, given the background what like Thomas Hobbes was undergoing at that point of time, he came across unless the government is strong enough, cannot protect neither like the society nor public nor the national interests of the state or the country, nor can play a decisive role right across the horizon at the global level. So, what is significant is the government has to be strong enough to take care, and then that is only possible when the government exercises various mechanism of powers in the form of adjudication or enforcement, or the powers of legislation is being shown through war making decisions or through taxation. All these criteria should be very much given in the hands of the absolute power. They should be in a position to handle all this because that's very, very important. Dear friends, only government, according to Thomas Hobbes, which possesses all of these arts, all of these processes, will be able to call the shots. Else, there will be mechanism of weakening the process of the central government, and then that can create big havoc. So it's like unity government where all power is residing in one hand along with good advisors who can help the governance, the ruler, the monarch, so that the essential rights and components of sovereignty may be taken into consideration and can and reliably should be very much viable, effective. And in that sense, there should be no factor which can make the government, which is absolute in a sense of discharging the power, should be paralyzed or can act any hurdle on the way of effective governance or try to create degeneration into a civil war or in any way can dismantle the power of the day. So Thomas Hobbes believed the government, if it is not a strong enough of any country, of any state, that is creating big havoc. Dear friends, it's very essential from his point of view. The government so implicitly and directly must impose limitations on the powers which can threaten the authority of the government, and then there should be no imposition of limitations on the governance or the monarch which can create in any way from any quarter or try to dismantle the current government for whatever reasons is. So Thomas Hobbes in that sense gives too much power to any government of his time, and if each person to decide himself or herself to take the law into his or her hand, that too will not be applicable, will not be encouraged, because that too will create problem. Dear friends, in this type of governance of absolutism of monarchism, though let me tell you, there are many monarchs even now in today's globalized world across many countries and areas. And to certain extent, Thomas Hobbes' perception also holds good with governance. There is no democracy, there is no political freedom with these countries. Still are there, and you can understand where the indication is. But the point is, at that point of time, that case was further very much dilapidated, and then kind of situation of civil war. Though uh, that was uncalled for, but it was happening. So decidedly, Thomas Hobbes talked about that other powers will not be allowed to dismantle, to create havoc, or to weaken the central government, and then no resolution for the questions in any way which can erode the authority of the government will be allowed. And then and also other factors will not be allowed to limit the power, be it like open to challenge or overstepping its bounds that can infringe the government's prowess, or then that can create non-authoritative for authorities. And then to refer it to a further authority, there should be no limitation upon the governmental acts leading to the governance for the country. Otherwise, it will justify for weakening the government or dethroning the sovereignty, or a position entirely will be inconsistent for running the government smoothly. Dear friends, from Thomas Hobbes' point of view, he was insisting on absolutism to avoid the horrible prospect of governmental collapse. He was in no way interested to create havoc which can really make a chance to uh, what you can say, to let the government fall, because he was knowing if the government falls from the center or like from the position, it will lead again to the chaos, again kind of anarchy, and that is in no way suitable for the country, for the society, for the sovereignty or the state. And so he wanted to treat sovereign as the highest order of absolute authority, which can be very much beneficial. Yes, he also talks about like limits of political obligations. So far, his state is concerned, subjects when like talking about like you can say uh, no wrong is done to a consenting party kind of situations. What he talks about like if the power has been given to a person who is enjoying a big power, then one should understand actually in that sense that the current government of that state of Thomas Hobbes will not create a problem for the public, for the society. So the public should not be susceptible about the running of the duties what are being conferred on the shoulder of the government. Dear friends, in this sense, Thomas Hobbes also talks about the interpretations about the authorization to a government who is sovereign and then morally responsible for the actions it commands toward the subject, toward the public, toward the society. So nobody should be in suspicion that the current government will be in disarray or will not really go for the prosperity and peace. Thomas Hobbes talks about the referendum in the sense that the position which was very essential that made really and allowed Thomas Hobbes to think and write about the government that should be really very strong. In the absence of a strong authority, what will happen? The situation will go out of hand, and then a chaotic situations will create and lead to the collapse of the government. Plus, public of that country will be fed up and then will be fighting against each one, and that will lead to the situation which will make the country very vulnerable, and then external powers can attack the state and can take away or can conquer, and that situation Thomas Hobbes does not want at any condition. So that the external actions done in obedience to laws will be disastrous and does not want to happen. Dear friends, Thomas Hobbes further in this connection talks about project of persuading his own philosophy that should be further inculcated regarding the formidable position of the authority should be there, and he explains whatsoever a subject is compelled to do in obedience to his sovereign in the sense should be definitely in a way talking the subject should be in line with of the obedience to the government, and then they should assume that the government whatever is doing in the subject's best interest, and they should not assume that that the government will be really creating horrible and then a chaos anarchy will be there. No, they should be affirming and they should be in positive, not that the nobody will be penalized, no punishment will be done who is not creating problems. For innocents, there is no need to fear and to have fear psychosis. Dear friends, in this sense, he also talked about in Leviatha, we had given too much power. Then you understood, you got the points from Kingdom of Darkness, how the state of nature was very much in chaos. But here, in this sense, he reminds the public that there is a need for political obligation, and then also there is limitation for authority to exercise power, which may not necessarily be in chaos. So Thomas Hobbes insists that this regard for the government should be there from the side of the public, as having absolute authority does not necessarily mean that the government will do whatever the government likes. Rather, he also talks about the reservation of certain liberty of uh, disobeying. Here is a catch from Thomas Hobbes' side. For the first time, he talks about security of individual or security of the public. He says, if there is a danger for the public regarding security of his or their life, then in that case, the public can really raise with arms in their hand and can resist the authority of the government and can revolt. In that sense, if their lives are at stake, if their lives are at danger, then only in that condition the public can go extra mile to thwart the nefarious designs of the authority, for which has not been instituted as an authority, rather has been put there for the sake of the public, not for the safety of the authority itself. Dear friends, in this sense, what is important is this: in self-defense against the sovereign power, the government, rather the public has the right, the authority. Thomas Hobbes talks about, and he gives that you can go extra mile to thwart their desires and cannot live in danger. Also, seemingly, if you find chances of like excessive power, then you can go for the resistance as a case of right, in which even if your families or Keith and Keens, or even if your honors are at stake, in that sense it's very very essential that you can go to the extent of protection, and you can protect yourself against the authority. So these exceptions are there, which never anything can found before regarding Thomas Hobbes, when he talks about like either Leviathan or absolute power, or giving sovereign authority to a particular entity or the party. Dear friends, this is in the examination paper for ISMANs. The question setter can ask you in different ways, for which you need to be psychologically ready to uh, write the answer of the question of any sort. But once you understand the question, once you understand the concept of this particular political thought of Thomas Hobbes, we are pretty sure you will be able to handle any kind of difficulties if it all come from any quarters, and then it will be much easier having understood the concept of his thinking and ideas. Moreover, in addition to this, if the sovereign's failure to provide adequate protection in any capacity to the public, then also public have the right to think twice about the sanctioning of the entire rights to the authority. So itself is a big issue. For the first time, we are coming across what Thomas Hobbes talks about. And from here, before he had not talked about like how exactly those rights can be defended, and how exactly things can be put in the right perspective by even not allowing the government, if the government is not taking care or creating security problems for the public. Then the public really carry a sense of rights with them to quell those security issues if that comes from the authority side, as Thomas Hobbes talks about. And then be it like Bishop Bramhall, he talks about this like rebels uh, catechism. And then there are many other like commentators who have talked about like Hobbes' discussion of the limits of political obligations, somewhat like you can say Achilles' heel of his theory. However, but then reality is reality, and it's not clear whether or not charge can stand up to scrutiny. That these exceptions, what Thomas Hobbes talked about, how far that could be really useful, and in what capacity it would be standing taller in front of the authority, and the same authority like where he has given and talked about to give maximum power and not to question the authority of the government. Then how best Thomas Hobbes is thinking that the once given too much power to a particular authority will be in a position to erode the authority if the same is not functioning according to the sanctioned rights that have been given or instituted in case of commonwealth to the absolutism, to the authority, or to the party which can run the government or the state or the society. So that's very, very important. One needs to take care, and it's so essential in the sense of that one cannot think of, particularly Thomas Hobbes, when he talks about like there is no question of erosion in general sense unless there is a warrant of security threat. Otherwise, the authority of the state should be continued as it is. What is going on in that sense? Dear friends, regarding what we are discussing just right now about like Thomas Hobbes' propositions on different issues, there are many questions which are being asked right across the political spectrum. Does Thomas Hobbes have any idea about like family and women's conditions at his time? That was a big question. So from exams point of view also, when you are going to write for men's IS and PCS, if the question comes on family and women, what Thomas Hobbes' stand was all about on that, then briefly you can like talk about this, which we are discussing in this video, might be quite useful for you all. So it's said about like Thomas Hobbes, he definitely he went against the time, and he was a great thinker in also the sense that who talked and who valued greatly to family and women. And Hobbes thought of the status of women and the family and attached great values to them. And then probably he was one of the earliest Western political thinkers who talked about like women as persons and tried to devise a social contract also among persons. And he did not really categorize and deny the rights of anything which can really divide women and family sections. He was the one who insisted on the equality of all people very explicitly, and including entire family and women in the society. They were not being asked to be deprived, rather, they were treated at par with, and all subjects to domination should not be there, and potentially capable of dominating others. Thomas Hobbes talked about like potentials of women families, and talked about that no person in the society should be vulnerable so that somebody can attack them, or should have snatched their rights, or nobody should be strong enough to create headache and problem for others, including family and women. So in that sense, it's a great time when it talks about like giving too much importance to the family and the women, while other, if you see the contemporary of that time, other thinkers, they were slightly much more reluctant and hesitant to accord as much rights and powers as like Thomas Hobbes would have, and talked about that, and he talked really in that sense. Dear friends, in this sense, equal, naturally free, and they were treated equally, like what we talk about like in our case of fundamental rights of part third of Indian Constitution, right to equality. So you can imagine even that time so many rights, or at least they were treated very equally, to the extent it was possible, and there was no discrimination from Thomas Hobbes' side itself is a big achievement. You can make a comparative study of that time and the time of today's globalized world, how exactly that is very significant, that hardly that time thinkers were so much open about according this past to the women sections of the society. Thomas Hobbes' claims stand really very taller about uh, when it talks about the government, even government should already not only be in a right position, but also women and family from all accounts should be treated equally, and then there should be no discrimination. And he argues for natural maternal right in the state of nature, and the dominion should be there from the children's side, from family side, and the mother should have definitely bigger rights over others. And that is so essential, which even in today's civilized world, you see the you can say, when there is a question of family, still people prefer about progeny somewhat like male counterparts. So essentially, if you see from that point of view, Thomas Hobbes, so we must give credit to him, okay, how he was talking in a sense gender equality, which even now the current world is still fighting about, how the gender equality should be achieved, and not only at social, local, regional, national, rather global level. And even UN talks about there should be the sense of gender equality, and then special provisions under various charters, various documents, various sections, and in various conferences across and through various agencies, UN talks about this. And you can understand at various level, in many countries they're concerned about that the families should be really treated well, and should be no discrimination, not only of a particular group or or any segment or particular territory. They should be treated well, and they should be treated equally. There are many continents, and there are many countries you are and we come across that their women's are treated secondarily, and their rights are somewhat, you can say, are put into questions. But Thomas Hobbes justifies his way by talking and saying that not fathers but the mothers should have big rights. And then the father's role are very significant in the society, but at the same time women should really have big play, and women should really play a decisive role, and then their rights should not be taken away and should not be snatched away, as it's very essential in the sense both should be taken into consideration at the right perspective and at par with. So, dear friends, let's conclude this what we talked just now. To conclude the entire spectrum of talks in this debate of part 3 under political science optional Western political thought, it can be said in the sense that though Thomas Hobbes talks about various things, and he talked about Commonwealth, and he talked about Leviathan and other issues in terms of political thought, what ideas he carry, but sovereign authority, we all saw how important, how significant it was from his ideas point of view, and how why he gave this authority. And he talked about about the government should be given because we need to understand the conditions prevailing at that time was so bizarre that no big government could have really afforded to maintain the state and the society or the nation, but the strong only iron government could have done that. And then secondly, he talked and gave like the monarch should be in absolutism, in absolute form of the governance, because that's very essential. In the absence of that, again, anarchy or chaos should have prevailed. That also needed to stop that. Dear friends, then he talked about political obligations and its limitations, how political obligations can play a decisive role, and essentially he reminded the public as well as from both the two parties in terms of Commonwealth one which was formed. There are certain rules to follow. Plus, when there was a question of security, there are many sections of the society were apprehensive. What will happen about the security in case the authority oversteps his power and then security of the public remains a threat? Then who will take care? Then we also Thomas Hobbes talks about and gives like freedom to the public. That in that case you have the right to defend yourself come what may to thwart any situations. Further, and it talks about like women's rights and families so beautifully. Thomas Hobbes, for the first time, unlike any other thinkers, he bravely handled and then like talked about like rights to women's also at par with should be treated. So this is all like for today's this part third's video under Thomas Hobbes. So essentially, uh, it's being now concluded about uh, part one, part two, and part three of this under Western political thought. Dear friends, if the entire video of today enlightened you, do like, do share, and subscribe. Thanks, and thanks for watching the video.